Big moves are actually happening around the world, ladies and gentlemen, in the Arctic, Europe, and of course Africa. And not everything is what it seems. Nations are sending troops or soldiers, planning exercises, and of course testing alliances. Meanwhile, Africa is quietly building partnerships with Russia and of course that of course China to protect its resources and future. Hidden tensions, unexpected strategies, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, long-term plans are unfolding. Stay until the end to discover the shocking development you haven't seen elsewhere. Early in 2026, ladies and gentlemen, geopolitical experts are watching a seemingly small part, of the world, the Arctic, specifically Greenland, and noticing signals of unease among Western powers. Whilst NATO has long been portrayed as a unified front, some analysts now question the real or actual strength of this alliance, ladies and gentlemen. Now, guess what? A South African politician and leader of a national party recently explained to Sputnik Africa that NATO and Europe's claims of unity are more symbolic than usual. He argued that recent developments, including the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, have exposed deep disagreements within the European Union. He says, in a quote, Germany and many others always wanted to remain as these Western traditionalist conservatives, that they will remain as these Western pets and they will fight, whatever country that wants to fight. Now, quotation close, ladies and gentlemen. Now, according to him, the European Union's limited troops deployment in strategic exercises such as the planned military maneuvers in Greenland, led by Denmark, highlight a dependence on the United States of America, France, and of course Germany. And some other EU states have sent relatively few soldiers compared to the UK, suggesting that each nation prioritizes its own interest over collective European strength. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he says again in a quote, Europe alone cannot defend Greenland. That is a matter of fact. Quotation close. He added nothing that's any direct clash between European forces and the United States of America over Arctic territory could actually risk drawing Russia into the situation. Now, guess what? The politician emphasized that African nations could actually draw lessons from Greenland's strategic vulnerability. He urged or encouraged closer military cooperation with BRICS countries or states and proposed creating a defensive military alliance on the continent to protect shared interests. He says in a quote, the only way Africa can succeed or save themselves is to collaborate with Russia and China and make sure whatever they have and whatever minerals they have, they make sure they get the best technology they could get and make sure that temporary for certain maybe 15 or 10 years to bring the Russian and Chinese military bases in Africa. Quotation close, ladies and gentlemen.
And the only way Africa that they can be able to succeed or save themselves is to collaborate with China and Russia and make sure whatever they have, whatever minerals they have, they make sure they get the best technology that they could get, and make sure that temporarily for certain maybe 15 years or 10 years to bring the Russian and Chinese bases in Africa, to make sure that Africa is solid and they are able to have their own military, then they can be able to defend themselves. But I can tell you, my brother, without US, without Russia and China, Africa is exposed.
Now, meanwhile, NATO officials would remain, publicly focused on maintaining cohesion among member states. The Secretary General of NATO acknowledged, or admitted concerns about Europe's reliance on the United States of America. Nothing. Now, he says in a quote, the US by far is the most powerful nation on earth and the leader of the free world, and you cannot envision NATO without the leader of the free world being an integral part of that organization. We need each other for our collective protection.
It is by far the most powerful nation on earth. And the President of the United States is therefore the leader of the free world, and you cannot envisage NATO without the leader of the free world being an integral part of that organization. And nobody wants it, not on the US side, not on the European side. He said last night in his presser that he was doubtful whether the Europeans would come to the rescue if Article 5 will be triggered. I tell him, yes, they will. And they did on the 11th of September 9/11 in 2001, when for the first and only time Article 5 was triggered. I have no doubt the US will come to the rescue here. We will come to the rescue of the US, and we need each other for our collective protection.
Ladies and gentlemen, now the Arctic's strategic importance is rising due to competing interests from several nations. Now, the president of the European Commission, ladies and gentlemen, also commented, referring to joint exercises and international cooperation. She says in a quote, "We do agree the US needs to ensure the security of Arctic region. And on this, we are not only aligned, but we are working together. Finland, for example, is working with the US on icebreakers, recent Danish-led Arctic light exercise a few months ago in the context of NATO.
Honourable members, we do agree with our American friends on the need to ensure the security of the Arctic region. And on this we are not only aligned, but we are working together, notably in the context of NATO. Finland, for example, is working with the United States on icebreakers, a key piece of equipment in the context of operations in the High North. Or take the recent Danish-led Arctic Light exercise a few months ago in the context of NATO. This was key to strengthening Allied readiness in the Arctic. So we are aligned, we are working together, we share the same strategic assessment on Arctic security, and this is why the threat of additional tariffs for security reasons is simply wrong.
She further added that, ladies and gentlemen, the threat of additional tariffs for security reasons is simply wrong, reflecting tensions between security, measures and economic concerns. Now, let's talk about this. Across Europe, ladies and gentlemen, discussions about Greenland have prompted debate over responsibility, independence, and of course, the limit of collective actions. Critics argue that European nations still rely heavily on US military support, and others suggest that growing threats from non-NATO countries or states, particularly Russia and of course China, means that nations must rethink alliances and security planning. The Arctic, once considered a quiet and remote region, is now a flash point in global strategic calculations. So ladies and gentlemen, this episode actually underscores the delicate or fragile balance between alliance promises and national interest. Whilst NATO claims unity, small differences in troop development, strategic priorities, and of course national agendas reveal a fragile structure. Now let's talk about US perspective and European concerns. Now, if I still was watching this particular video, ladies and gentlemen, or enjoying this coverage, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and turning on notifications for regular updates. We aim to provide clear, calm, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, factual reporting on international developments like this. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, recent events, in Greenland have actually sparked reactions from both sides of the Atlantic. European leaders reportedly raised concerns during meetings at Davos, pressing US officials for clarity on Arctic defense commitments. Now, however, the response from the US Commerce Secretary emphasized an American first approach. He states, and I quote, ladies and gentlemen, the Western Hemisphere is vital to US national security and the issue will be handled by American security officials with allies as needed, quotation close. He also stressed or stated, and I quote, a strong unified state is essential for global stability. When America shines, the world shines, quotation close. Now, closing the discussion firmly and preventing further debate over Greenland, European observers note that past reliance on US forces have led to uneven preparedness in joint operations. So, the Secretary General of NATO addressed these concerns.
Already Alex was saying, the President of Finland was saying, that we would come to an overall defense spending of 5%, including 3.5% in core defense. If President Trump would not have been re-elected as President of the United States, no way, it would never have happened. So again, I'm not popular with you now because I'm defending Donald Trump, but I really believe we can be happy that he is there because he has forced us in Europe to step up, to face the consequences, that we have to take care more of our own defense. And this is the thing. The Americans still have over 80,000 soldiers in Europe. They are still, including in Poland, in Germany, etc. They are still heavily invested in European defense. And yes, they have to pivot more towards Asia. So it is only logical for them to expect us in Europe to step up over time. And there is this plan already since Jens Stoltenberg, my predecessor, designed it, the NATO defense planning process, to over time make sure that Europe can take over more of these capabilities, of these core enablers from the US, to do more of the protection of the European continent.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? This frank assessment highlights how U.S. military priorities shape European national security strategies, whilst the United States of America maintains global leadership. European national nations navigate the tension between dependence and, of course, independence. So Europe's smaller troop contribution in exercises like those in Greenland reflect both logistical limitations and, of course, different national priorities. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive deeper. The Secretary General of NATO also reflects on potential threats and current priorities, saying, in a quote, "I think Trump is right. We need to defend Arctic. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active there. 8 countries in the Arctic are members of NATO, and there is only one country outside NATO, Russia."
And when it comes to the Arctic, I think President Trump is right. Other leaders in NATO are right. We need to defend the Arctic. We know that these sea lanes are opening up. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic. There are 8 countries bordering on the Arctic. 7 are a member of NATO. That's Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, Iceland, Canada and the US. And there's only one country bordering on the Arctic outside NATO, and that's Russia.
Additionally, he underscored the ongoing focus on Eastern Western Europe, ladies and gentlemen, stating, and I quote, "Ukraine should be our #1 priority, and then we can discuss on all the issues, including Greenland." Quotation close, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in short, whilst the Arctic emerges as a strategic hotspot, NATO remains internally divided over roles and responsibilities. European dependence on US military presence continues to shape strategic decisions, yet the rise of non-NATO actors like Russia and China pushes NATO and EU countries or states to consider new defense approaches, and the region's natural resources, trade routes, and of course geopolitical positioning make it a significant area of international interest, bridging Europe, North America, and of course Asia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? The Greenland issue, though small in geographical terms, illuminates larger questions about alliances, sovereignty, and of course global military coordination. For Africa and other regions, ladies and gentlemen, it serves as a lesson. Strategic regions require thoughtful partnerships, capable of defense planning, and of course the attention to emerging global actors. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us quickly talk about the historical context and global implications. To understand Greenland's significance, it is very important to recall or remember the post-Cold War evolution of Europe and NATO. After 1991, ladies and gentlemen, European nations gradually reduced their independent military capabilities, relying on US support for global security. So now, the Arctic, long seen as remote, has grown in importance due to shipping routes, mineral deposits, and of course, new military technologies. So, ladies and gentlemen, the limited troop deployment in Greenland illustrates a broader reality. Europe's strategic autonomy remains constrained. Many analysts see NATO not as a truly unified force, but as a structure heavily reliant on US leadership. Yes, so the South African politician summarized this view, explaining that Europe's dependence reflects the decline of Western imperialism, and of course that countries act primarily in their own interest rather than collective strength. So, ladies and gentlemen, global reactions vary. The United States, maintaining over 80,000 troops in Europe, continues to project power whilst signaling priorities elsewhere, particularly in Asia. Meanwhile, countries such as Russia and of course China are increasingly active in Arctic regions, testing the assumptions underlying Western military planning. For Africa, ladies and gentlemen, these developments carry lessons. Yes, so nations with rich mineral resources and strategic locations may face similar pressures. Yes, so building alliances, leveraging technology, and of course forming defensive agreements with global partners are potential steps to secure sovereignty. So in essence, ladies and gentlemen, Greenland actually represents both microcosm of alliance tension and a symbol of strategic opportunity. NATO and European states or nations grapple with limits to their autonomy, whilst global powers position themselves for influence. The Arctic scenario also highlights the shifting balance between traditional allies and of course emerging or appearing powers, emphasizing the importance of strategic foresight. Though, ladies and gentlemen, calm observation, analysts note that cooperation, preparation, and awareness of political vulnerabilities will shape the next decades. Greenland serve as a reminder that geography, resources, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, global alliances intersect in ways that require careful planning, balanced action, and measured diplomacy. Nations worldwide can actually observe these developments to better understand the complexities of international security. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you found this coverage helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on your notifications for more calm and informative updates on global affairs. Staying informed allows viewers like you to understand international relations without alarm or bias, ensuring that knowledge is shared responsibly. Thank you so much. Don't forget, also do us one favor by sharing this video with someone important like you. Thank you.